Nobody expected it to go this far. A father, a son, and a single moment that cracked everything open. What started as a private family argument suddenly spilled into the public eye. Clips, reactions, and rumors spreading faster than the truth. But behind the noise, one question keeps growing louder. Was this just a misunderstanding, or the moment everything inside the family finally broke? And now, everyone is waiting for the next move, because this story doesn't feel finished yet. Nobody expected it to spiral like this. Not the fans, not the blogs, not even people who had watched this family live under a spotlight for years. It looked like just another heated moment, just another father and son clash that would cool down, fade out, and get buried like the rest. But this time it didn't fade. It detonated. Because in a world where everything gets recorded, clipped, and reposted within seconds, there was no room for damage control, no private correction, no quiet resolution behind closed doors. What happened stayed in the open, and once it hit the internet, it stopped belonging to them. It belonged to everybody. At the center of it all was King Harris, stepping out from the shadow of a father whose name has carried weight in the industry for decades. A father known for control, discipline, and authority. A father known for never letting his household narrative slip out of his hands. Until now. According to what began circulating online, a confrontation escalated inside the home. Voices were raised, lines were crossed, and then came the moment people keep replaying, the alleged physical reaction after King reportedly mentioned 50 Cent in a way that didn't sit well with the situation unfolding in front of him. That detail alone was enough to light the fuse. But what followed is what turned it into something uncontrollable. Because instead of backing down, King didn't retreat into silence like people expected. He leaned into the storm, and suddenly, the tone shifted from a private family disagreement to something much more exposed, much more public, and far more uncomfortable for everyone watching. He started speaking. And when he spoke, it wasn't filtered. It wasn't softened. It wasn't family safe. It was direct. He began referencing moments that, according to online chatter, were never meant to leave the household. Private dynamics, heated exchanges, old tensions that had never fully healed, just managed. And now, all of it was spilling into the public space in fragments, clips, and statements that people couldn't ignore even if they wanted to. The internet did what it always does. It froze on one question. What is really happening inside that family? Because if even part of what King was implying held weight, then this wasn't just a disagreement. This was years of pressure finally breaking through the surface at the worst possible moment. And that's where the deeper layer started to form. This wasn't just about one argument. It wasn't just about disrespect or a name being mentioned. It was about something far more complicated building over time inside a household that has always existed under public expectation. T has long carried a public image built on structure, control, and leadership. A man who presents himself as someone who survived chaos and turned it into discipline. That image, whether people agree with it or not, became part of how the world understood him. But inside that structure was King, growing up under that same spotlight, not as a background character, but as someone constantly measured against a standard he didn't choose. And that's where friction starts to make sense. Because pressure doesn't always explode immediately. Sometimes it builds quietly, in small disagreements, in offhand comments, in moments that look harmless on camera but feel heavier behind the scenes. Over time, people started noticing signs. The tone in interviews, the subtle pushback in conversations, moments where King didn't fully align with the image being presented around him. At first, it looked like typical growing pains, normal distance between a father and a son finding his own voice. But it didn't stay normal. It intensified. And then came the outside noise. Because once you add a figure like 50 Cent into the emotional ecosystem of this situation, the temperature rises instantly. His presence in the culture, his history of commentary, and his tendency to amplify tension rather than ignore it, all of that becomes part of the backdrop, whether directly involved or not. And suddenly, something that could have stayed contained inside a family becomes fuel for a much larger conversation online. Old tensions get revisited, past interviews get rewatched, small comments get reinterpreted as clues, and the internet, as it always does, starts building a narrative out of fragments. But the real turning point wasn't just what was said. It was what happened after. Silence didn't settle it. It expanded it. Because neither side fully controlled the story anymore. King spoke. The internet reacted, clips circulated, context got lost, and emotion filled the gaps where facts weren't confirmed. And in that gap, the story evolved on its own. People started splitting into sides. Some saw a young man finally speaking out. Others saw disrespect and chaos being broadcast without restraint. And in the middle of it, the original reality got harder and harder to separate from interpretation. Then came the moment that made everything feel irreversible. Not another statement, not another clip, but the realization that this wasn't a one-day incident. This was a build-up. Years of pressure, identity conflict, expectations, public scrutiny, and private tension all converging at once in a single explosive moment that the internet just happened to witness in real time. And once that realization hit, the conversation changed again. It stopped being about what happened in that specific moment and started becoming about everything that led to it. The upbringing, the expectations, the image, the silence before the explosion. And now, the most uncomfortable part of all of this isn't the argument itself. It's the fact that it happened publicly enough for the world to dissect it without ever truly understanding what was said behind closed doors. Because at this point, every new clip, every new reaction, every new repost doesn't bring clarity. It just adds another layer of noise. And in the middle of that noise, one thing is clear. This situation didn't start online, but it has already escaped it. And what happens next won't be decided by rumors, captions, or viral clips. It will come from whatever truth finally breaks through all the noise, if it ever fully does. By the time the alleged smack moment entered the conversation, the situation was already unstable. The internet just didn't realize it yet. From the outside, it looked like a sudden explosion, a single heated exchange that escalated too fast, too public, too intense for people to process in real time. But inside that moment, according to what's being pieced together online, nothing about it was sudden. It had been building for years. Pressure, tension, unspoken frustration, and the constant weight of being both a public figure's son and a public figure in your own right. All of it stacking quietly in the background until something finally cracked. And that moment, the one people keep replaying, wasn't the start of the story. It was the breaking point. Because once things crossed that line, King Harris didn't respond like someone caught off guard. He responded like someone who had been holding back for a long time, like something inside him had already decided this wasn't going to stay contained anymore. And that's where everything shifted. What followed wasn't just reaction, it was release. The alleged incident tied to 50 Cent became the spark everyone points to, but even that detail is still debated. Some say it was disrespect. Some say it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Others insist it was just a comment taken too far in a moment already filled with tension. But what nobody is debating is the reaction that followed. Because once the moment escalated, things didn't cool down. They multiplied. Clips started circulating almost instantly. Short fragments, shaky recordings, pieces of audio without full context. The kind of content that spreads faster than clarity ever can. And suddenly, a private family argument wasn't private at all. It was public property. And once it hit that stage, the energy changed completely. According to viral accounts, that's when things allegedly turned physical. Reports online suggest T smacked King during the exchange, but even that detail exists in a storm of conflicting versions. No one agrees on the exact sequence, only that the moment escalated far beyond words. And that's what made it explode. Because it wasn't just what happened. It was where it happened. A father and son, under a legacy, under pressure, under the weight of an audience that wasn't even in the room but saw everything within minutes. And the internet reacted exactly how it always does, when something feels too real to process. It replayed it. It dissected it. It argued over every frame. But the most unexpected shift didn't come from the incident itself. It came from King's response afterward. Because instead of disappearing into silence, he came back louder. Not physically, but verbally, emotionally, and publicly. And what he started saying changed the direction of the entire conversation. He didn't just argue, he started revealing. Fragments of personal history, hints at private moments, comments that didn't fully explain anything but suggested there was more behind the public image than people realized. And that's when the internet stopped treating it like a one-off incident. It started treating it like a story. A layered one. A long one. One that had been unfolding quietly long. Before anyone saw the moment it broke. And then came something even more destabilizing. People started watching T's reaction more closely. Not just what he said, but how he reacted. And for the first time, some viewers claimed they saw something different. Not the controlled, calculated public figure people were used to, but something sharper, more emotional, less filtered. That observation alone shifted the tone online. Because when someone known for control appears momentarily out of control, people start asking different questions. What was already happening behind the scenes? What led to that exact moment? What was said before the camera caught anything? And more importantly, what hasn't been shown? Then King went online. And that's when the situation stopped being reactive and became explosive. Because instead of letting things settle, he leaned into it. Posts started appearing. Statements that didn't clarify but implied. Messages that hinted at deeper frustrations, long-standing issues, and private dynamics that the public was never meant to see. Nothing fully explained, but everything emotionally loaded. And that was enough to keep the internet locked in. Because now it wasn't about one moment anymore. It was about decoding a relationship, a history, a pattern. And once that shift happened, every old clip got rewatched. Every interview got reinterpreted. Every interaction suddenly looked different through the lens of what was unfolding now. Then another layer entered the conversation. People started suggesting this wasn't the first time tension like this had surfaced, that there had been signs before, small moments, off-camera energy, public corrections that felt more serious in hindsight. Whether true or not, the idea of a pattern changed everything. Because patterns are harder to dismiss than moments. And once people believe there's a pattern, the entire past becomes evidence in their mind. That's when King hinted at something else. Something tied to the original trigger. Something involving the mention of 50 Cent and why it may have caused such a strong reaction in the first place. He didn't fully explain it, but he didn't need to. Because the suggestion alone was enough to push the narrative further into speculation, where certainty disappears and interpretation takes over. And just when it felt like the story had peaked, King went live. No preparation, no warning, no filter. And that's the moment everything shifted again. Because live doesn't allow editing. It doesn't allow cleanup. It captures emotion exactly as it is, unfiltered and immediate. And in that space, the situation stopped being just a viral clip. It became something unfolding in real time. Something unstable. Something still not finished. And the most unsettling part of all of it is this. Even after everything that's been said, posted, and replayed, the full story still isn't clear. Only fragments are. And fragments always leave room for more. The moment King Harris went live, everything shifted in a way nobody was prepared for. Because this wasn't the energy people were expecting from a typical father-son disagreement. This wasn't confusion or teenage frustration or a heated exchange that cools off after a few hours. This felt intentional, controlled, like something that had been sitting inside him for a long time finally reached its limit and broke through all at once. And the first line he said changed the entire tone instantly. "I'm done protecting people who don't protect me." That wasn't just emotion. That sounded like a decision. A line drawn after years of silence, years of holding things in, years of trying to keep things contained for the sake of image, family, and public perception. And once that line hit the internet, people stopped scrolling and started listening. Because now this wasn't just about a moment anymore. It was about everything that led to it. King didn't immediately go into full detail. He didn't lay out a clean timeline or give a structured explanation. Instead, he did something more unsettling. He dropped fragments, pieces of conversations, hints at private disagreements, references to situations that had clearly been handled differently behind closed doors than how they appeared in public. And that's what made it feel heavier. Because the more he spoke, the more it became clear this wasn't spontaneous. This was built up, stored, held back for a long time. Then he brought up 50 Cent again. And this time it wasn't casual. It wasn't just a passing mention or a reaction to internet chatter. It sounded like there was context behind it, like something had happened or been discussed that people outside the situation were never supposed to fully understand. He didn't explain it directly, but he didn't need to. Because the implication was enough. Suddenly, the internet wasn't just reacting to a family argument anymore. It was trying to decode relationships, connections, history. People started going back to rough old interviews, old clips, moments where T and 50 Cent had crossed paths publicly. Things that once felt like standard industry interactions now looked different through this new lens. Everything was being reinterpreted in real time. And then King dropped another line that hit even harder. "You care more about how it looks than what it really is." That one sentence opened a completely new layer of speculation. Because people started asking whether he was talking about image management, public reputation, or something deeper entirely. Something involving how situations are presented to the public versus how they actually unfold in private. And once that question entered the conversation, it spread fast. Now people weren't just watching a conflict. They were analyzing intent. Then came the moment that pushed everything further into chaos. Shortly after the live ended, an alleged audio clip started circulating online. No confirmation, no verified source, just something that appeared suddenly and began spreading rapidly across platforms. Two voices. One claimed by users to sound like T. Another unidentified voice, speculated to be connected to the situation. Nothing about it was proven, but that didn't matter in the moment, because the internet doesn't wait for verification when something feels emotionally aligned with the narrative already forming. And this clip, real or not, added fuel. People began breaking it down instantly, listening repeatedly, slowing it down, comparing tones, arguing over whether it was authentic or manipulated. And with every replay, the situation escalated further. Some said it confirmed everything King had been hinting at. Others said it was fabricated chaos designed to push the story even further out of control. But nobody could ignore it, because now the conversation wasn't contained anymore. It had gone fully public, fully reactive, and fully unstable. Then, at the peak of the noise, 50 Cent responded, not directly addressing everything, not clarifying, just a post, a caption, subtle enough to avoid responsibility, but powerful enough to shift attention immediately. And that was enough. Because when someone with his history of commentary enters a situation like this, even indirectly, the narrative expands again. Now it wasn't just about family tension. It wasn't just about internal conflict. It had become something the entire internet was tracking like a developing storyline. And with each new post, each new reaction, each new clip, the pressure kept building. Meanwhile, King didn't stop. That was the most important detail. He didn't retreat. He didn't go silent. He didn't try to cool the situation down. He stayed in it. And every time he spoke, the internet treated it like another piece of evidence being added to a case that was still unfolding in real time. That's when the split happened. The audience divided instantly. One side said this was disrespect, that family matters should stay private, that going public with this kind of tension crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed. The other side saw something different. They saw a young man refusing to stay silent, refusing to maintain an image that didn't reflect his reality, refusing to carry pressure without speaking on it. And neither side was willing to move. The debate turned emotional, personal, aggressive. Comment sections turned into arguments. Threads turned into battles. Every clip became a new piece of ammunition for whichever side people had chosen. Then the industry reacted, but not fully. And that silence became part of the story too. Some public figures said nothing at all. No posts, no comments, no vague statements. And that silence created its own interpretation. Because in moments like this, silence isn't neutral. It gets analyzed. It gets questioned. It becomes part of the narrative, whether intentional or not. Fans noticed immediately. Why aren't they speaking? Do they know more? Are they avoiding involvement for a reason? And just like that, the situation expanded again. It was no longer just about what was said. It was about who was silent, who was watching, and who might speak next. Because at this point, the internet wasn't reacting to a moment anymore. It was tracking a developing story that kept changing shape with every new post, every new clip, and every new silence. And the most unstable part of all of it is this. It still hasn't reached its final form. Nobody saw it coming like this. Not the fans, not the blogs, not even the people who usually catch every whisper before it becomes noise. Because at first, it looked like just another heated family moment, something that would flare up online for a few hours, maybe a day, then fade like everything else in this fast-moving internet cycle. But this didn't fade. It escalated. And it escalated in a way that made the entire timeline feel unstable. It started with King Harris stepping into a moment that was already tense behind the scenes. A father-son. In disagreement, the kind people assume stays private, the kind that usually gets handled away from cameras. But this time, there was no privacy left, no controlled narrative, no cleanup before the public got a glimpse. Everything spilled out in real time. And once it spilled, it couldn't be pulled back in. The turning point, according to what's circulating online, came when an exchange crossed a line involving 50 Cent. Now the exact wording is still debated. Some say it was disrespectful. Others say it was just frustration being misread. But what nobody is debating is what allegedly happened next. The energy shifted instantly. Reports and clips started circulating claiming things escalated physically between King Harris and his father, T. Some describe it as a heated reaction. Others say it was a disciplinary moment taken too far. But in the internet's version of events, one phrase keeps repeating: King got smacked. Whether that moment played out exactly as described or not is still being argued, but the reaction it triggered was immediate and uncontrollable. Because the moment that clip or version of events hit social media, the situation stopped being private family tension. It became public warfare. And that's when King Harris responded. Not calmly, not carefully, but emotionally loudly, and in a way that made it clear something deeper had been sitting under the surface for a long time. At first, people thought it was just anger, a reaction to embarrassment, pressure, or being put on the spot. But the more he spoke, the more it didn't feel random. It felt stored, like he had been holding onto thoughts, experiences, and frustrations for years, and this moment cracked the door open. And once that door opened, everything started pouring out. He didn't just argue about what happened in that moment. He started hinting at what led up to it. Private dynamics, family expectations, pressure that comes from living in a public legacy. And suddenly, people weren't just watching a disagreement anymore. They were trying to decode a history. Because this wasn't just about one argument. This was about identity. King Harris grew up under the weight of a very public father. T isn't just a parent in the traditional sense. He's a cultural figure, a businessman, a voice of authority in hip-hop and beyond. And that kind of presence doesn't just raise a child. It shapes them under constant observation. From the outside, it always looks structured, controlled, disciplined. T presented an image of order, leadership, and accountability. And King, growing up inside that image, wasn't just a son. He was part of the brand whether he wanted to be or not. And that's where the tension started building long before anyone noticed. Because pressure like that doesn't always show itself loudly. It shows up in small reactions, in offhand comments, in moments where a young voice pushes back just slightly against a bigger shadow. People started noticing it over time. Interviews where King seemed slightly resistant. Public moments where the energy between father and son felt more layered than playful. Nothing dramatic on its own, but enough to make people pause and wonder what wasn't being said. Then social media did what it always does. It amplified everything. Old clips resurfaced. Past interviews were rewatched under new context. Every interaction between them got reinterpreted. What once looked like normal family correction started looking like tension points in hindsight. And once that reinterpretation started, there was no stopping it. Then 50 Cent entered the conversation, not directly at first, but in the way he often does, through commentary, reactions, and indirect posts that fuel speculation without fully explaining anything. And that's important because 50 Cent isn't just a background figure in internet culture. He's a catalyst. When he engages with a topic, it doesn't stay small. It grows, it multiplies, it spreads. So when his name got tied into the moment King allegedly spoke about, everything intensified. People began asking whether this was just about disrespect or something deeper involving history, ego, and long-standing tension between major figures in the industry. And then came the shift that changed the tone entirely. King Harris started speaking more. Not just reacting, but revealing fragments of his perspective that felt personal. He didn't lay everything out clearly. Instead, he dropped pieces, statements about feeling misunderstood, comments about private realities versus public images, and hints that what people see is not the full truth. And with each post, each clip, each statement, the internet became more divided. Some people saw honesty. Others saw escalation, but everyone saw impact. Then came the moment that truly blew everything open. King going live. No script, no filter, no delay, just raw expression. And the first line, according to viewers, set the entire tone. "I'm done protecting people who don't protect me." That single sentence changed the direction of the entire conversation, because it wasn't just frustration anymore. It was a decision, a boundary being drawn in real time. And once he started speaking, things didn't slow down. He referenced feeling overlooked, hinted at private struggles, and suggested that the public version of events doesn't match what actually happens behind closed doors. And while he didn't give full details, he gave enough to ignite interpretation. The internet filled in the blanks immediately. And that's where things got dangerous. Because once interpretation replaces facts, narratives multiply. Old arguments resurfaced again. People started connecting unrelated moments. Every past interaction between T and King was now being treated like evidence in a case nobody officially filed. And then came the silence. Because T, known for being controlled and strategic in public response, didn't immediately engage in the same way. And that silence created its own wave of speculation. Was it restraint, strategy, or something deeper? No one agreed. Then the industry reacted. Some stayed silent, which only made people more suspicious. Others posted vague messages about respect, family, and understanding, but avoided direct names. And that only fueled more curiosity. And in the middle of all this, 50 Cent reappeared in the conversation again with a post that felt both casual and loaded at the same time. Not a breakdown, not a confession, just a line that made people pause. Family business always comes out eventually. That was enough. Because at that point, the internet wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting. Waiting for the next clip, the next statement, the next reveal, and most importantly, waiting for King Harris to say more. Because the sense growing online wasn't that the story was ending. It was that it was only halfway revealed. Then came another wave of speculation, claims that there might be more context still hidden, that King may not have shared everything yet, and that what's already public could just be fragments of something much larger. A message allegedly circulated online suggesting there's a real reason behind everything that hasn't been fully explained. No proof, no confirmation, but enough ambiguity to reignite the entire discussion again. And that's the pattern now. Every calm moment breaks into another spike. Every silence gets filled with theories. Every post becomes a clue. And every clue becomes a debate. At this point, the situation is no longer just about one incident. It has become a layered narrative about family, fame, pressure, image, control, and the cost of growing up inside a spotlight that never turns off. And the most unsettling part, no one involved seems finished speaking, which means the internet isn't witnessing closure. It's witnessing escalation in slow motion. And as long as there are unanswered questions, missing details, and voices still holding back, this story isn't going anywhere. It's evolving. And whatever comes next, whatever is said, revealed, or leaked, could shift everything again in a way nobody is prepared for.